Welcome everyone, good afternoon, and welcome to the Department of Psychiatry and CPFD Lunchtime Seminar. Now, my name is Rashid Zaman, and I have the pleasure of chairing today's seminar. The title of today's talk is Expert by Personal and Professional Experience, a Novel Anti-Stigma Intervention Targeting Healthcare Professionals and Students. So, on to our speaker. Dr. Ahmed Hankir is currently an academic clinical fellow in psychiatry at the Institute of Psychiatry, King's College London. He's also a senior research fellow at the Center of Mental Health Research in association with Cambridge University. And additionally, he's also a public education engagement lead for the World Health Organization Collaborating Center for Mental Health, Disabilities and Human Rights at the Institute of Mental Health, University of Nottingham. Yeah, so I know Ahmed pretty well. I first met him about 10 years ago at the Cambridge Biennial International Conference on Mental Health. He was a medical student then at Manchester University, and he won a prize for the poster presentation and of course, never looked back. Soon after qualifying as a doctor, he was carrying out very popular international presentations. And within a few years, he's delivered talks to total audience of more than 75,000 in many countries, covering 5 continents. And not forgetting our own Cambridge Union Society, which I was there. It was pretty impressive. So I had the pleasure to work with him on development of Wounded Healer program, carry out research, challenging stigma, Islamophobia, and of course, helping with the Choose Psychiatry program. So we've done a lot of work on that. Ahmed's research interests include global and Muslim mental health, pioneering, evaluating innovative programs that challenge mental health stigma and Islamophobia that relates to that. Now, he's managed to co-edit 3 textbooks on psychiatry and faith with senior members of American Psychiatric Association. He's a recipient of numerous prestigious awards that includes Foundation Doctor of the Year Award, Co-Psychiatry Trainee of the Year Award, and he's been twice finalist for the Communicator of the Year Award by the Royal College of Psychiatrists. He's clearly a dynamic speaker, best enjoyed in person, but I'm sure despite the limitation of Zoom, we're in for a treat. So on to you, Ahmed Hankir.
Thank you so much, Rashid, for that very kind introduction and for empowering me and inspiring me to choose psychiatry and your unwavering support throughout the years. And I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for you. So I can't thank you enough. I'm very grateful to receive this invitation to give the talk on experts by personal and professional experience, a novel anti-stigma intervention targeting healthcare professionals and students. So we'll dive in. Okay, so this is the outline. I'm going to highlight the epidemic of psychological problems in healthcare professionals and students, and discuss and describe the role that experts by personal and professional experience, aka wounded healers, can play at reducing mental health related stigma and increasing recruitment into psychiatry. This was an unintended consequence, but obviously a positive consequence of the wounded healer. And present data from pilot studies on increasing interest in psychiatry as a career and challenging mental health related stigma in healthcare professionals and students. So it's true, doctors are human too, and as such, we are also vulnerable to developing mental health problems, psychological distress, emotion exhaustion, compassion fatigue, all of the above. So this was a study conducted by Professor Neil Greenberg at the EPPE, and they recruited 709 healthcare workers from ICUs across England, and they invited them to complete this anonymous web-based survey. This is in June and July 2020, and 45% of the participants met the threshold for at least one of the following diagnoses: so severe depression, PTSD, severe anxiety, or problem drinking. And 13% report that they experienced either suicidal ideation or thoughts of self-harm over the last 2 weeks. So this systematic review of physician suicide showed that the suicide rate among physicians is 28 to 40 per 100,000, which is more than double that in the general population. So in relation to mental health, there are three kind of broad approaches. You have the proactive, so prevention rather is better than intervention. So developing mental health resilience, for example, a healthy body is a healthy mind, but it doesn't matter how many Zumba classes you attend, unless we address, for example, some of the systemic issues like workforce shortages, there will continue to be psychological problems in the workforce. So a reactive approach, okay, so let's say you're a medical student, for example, and you develop psychological problems. So you would be referred to a counselor on campus to treat those psychological problems or to manage those psychological problems. And then the third approach is instigating systemic change, challenging that culture of stigma and shame that permeates not only medical schools, but our National Health Service. So this is a statement released by Dr. Ananta Davi at the Royal College of Psychiatrists, and she emphatically exclaimed, not only are medical professionals at higher risk of suicide than the general population, but they also disproportionately suffer from the stigma of seeking help. So a survey on over 2,100 female physicians who met the diagnostic criteria for a mental disorder revealed that 50% were reluctant to seek professional help because of fear of exposure to stigmatization. 50% of female physicians who met the diagnostic criteria for a mental disorder report that they were reluctant to seek professional help because of fear of exposure to stigmatization. So stigma and a culture of shame are formidable barriers to mental health care services, and consequently, many people with mental health difficulties continue to suffer in silence despite the availability of effective treatment. And I really need to repeat that, to emphasize that despite the availability of effective treatment, many people, including doctors, psychiatrists, healthcare workers with mental health problems, continue to suffer in silence. And that, for me, is outrageous. So this is Dr. Miles Christie, and he tragically killed himself. He's a GP who tragically killed himself, fearing that he would lose his job if he talked about his mental health. And this is a statement from his brother, Phil Christie. There is a stigma surrounding doctors and mental health. And Dr. Miles Christie was survived by his wife and his 2 children. And I think consequent to this, Dame Professor Claire Gerarda and her team at Practitioner Health in Vauxhall, they were invited to Downing Street by Matt Hancock. And then there was a 24-hour helpline for doctors in distress, which is fantastic. And that is commendable. But in my humble opinion, that doesn't address the problem. If you remember, there are 3 broad approaches to mental health: proactive, reactive, and instigating a systemic change. And the problem here is that mental health related stigma is rampant in the NHS and is preventing doctors who have mental health difficulties from receiving the care that they urgently need. This is Dr. Daksha Emson. She was a brilliant psychiatrist with bipolar affective disorder, and she tragically killed herself and her 3-month-old baby daughter Freya during a psychotic episode, and an independent inquiry into her death concluded that she was the victim of stigma in the National Health Service. So as I mentioned, mental health related stigma is rampant in our NHS. And if there's one take-home message, let it be this one: that stigma is killing people. Stigma is killing people. So we have to do everything we can to combat it. So stigma was defined by Goffman as a deeply discrediting attributes, that reduces the bearer from a whole and usual person to a tainted and discounted one. The individual is thus disqualified from full social acceptance. So what is that deeply discrediting attribute? Well, it could be mental illness. It could be ethnicity. And we know that racism is a major problem in not only in British society, but in psychiatry too, as will be elaborated. And it could be your faith. You could be a Muslim. And we know Islamophobia is a growing problem in the West. So you have this phenomenon known as intersectionality, when you have layer upon layer upon layer of deeply discrediting attributes. And so that's, for example, the double stigma or the triple stigma or even the quadruple stigma. So you could be, for example, a man from a Black, Asian, minority ethnic background who has a mental disorder and who is also an adherent of the Islamic faith. So that would be the triple whammy or the triple stigma. Unsurprisingly, outcomes in that group are poor. So the American Psychiatric Association recently issued an apology to Black, Indigenous, and people of color for its support of structural racism in psychiatry. And we are not immune to racism in psychiatry in the UK. And this is the survey that was conducted by the Royal College of Psychiatrists recently. 6 in 10 Black, Asian, and minority ethnic psychiatrists have experienced racism at the workplace. So sources of stigma, the 2008 Stigma Shout survey of over 4,000 people using mental health services and carers revealed that healthcare professionals were a common source of stigma reported by people who have mental health difficulties. And unfortunately, one of the most stigmatizing medical specialties is psychiatry. And many people who have received mental health care report they have been brutalized by psychiatric services and by psychiatrists. And we cannot turn a deaf ear or a blind eye to the people who report that they have been brutalized by psychiatry, because we need to harmonize relations between providers and receivers. Otherwise, that gulf will just continue to grow. So a position bias has been reported in the literature, whereby healthcare practitioners, especially psychiatrists, tend to have more negative views about the recovery of people with mental illness compared to the general public. So stigma is an umbrella term, and it can be deconstructed into 3 main components. Now, this is important when you want to operationalize stigma and when you want to evaluate anti-stigma campaigns, because there are validated psychometric stigma scales in each of these domains. So problems of knowledge, ignorance, problems of attitudes, prejudice, and problems of behavior, discrimination. Now, these are the 3 broad approaches to challenging stigma: through protest, through education, and through contact. Now, Patrick Corrigan conducted a systematic review and meta-analysis of outcome studies on challenging public stigma of mental illness. And he revealed that the most effective way of reducing stigma in adults is when you make social contact with someone who has recovered from a mental health condition. Why? Because we have these preconceptions of people who have mental health conditions. And when we meet these people, we discover that they have hopes and fears and dreams and vulnerabilities and strengths like everyone else. We discover that we are human beings. So this is Prince Harry, as you can see, and he was interviewed by Bryony Gordon in The Telegraph. And he embraced his vulnerability. He spoke very honestly about living with mental health difficulties. And mental health charities report that there was a surge in the number of people who contacted their information line. So, for example, Mind state that there was a 38% increase in people who contacted their helpline. So we know that by being honest and open about our experiences living with a mental health condition, it can help to reduce not only self-stigma, but public stigma. Now, Prince Harry is what you would call an expert by experience. And it's fantastic. We need to amplify the voices of experts by experience, survivors. But I really think my contention is that psychiatrists living with a mental health condition, also known as wounded healers or experts by personal and professional experience, should be showing leadership, because we're not. that space is currently occupied by experts by experience. And as I said, we need to amplify the voices of experts by experience, but they are not experts by professional experience. And we should really be using our professional expertise and our personal expertise to be kind of blazing trails in our wake, and we're not. And that's deeply disappointing, in my opinion. Because some of the information these experts by experience shared is actually incorrect and inaccurate, and that can be harmful because they're not trained professionals. So how do we react to public stigma? We can internalize it, and we can develop diminished self-stigma and self-efficacy. So there's something called the why try effect. Why should I apply to go to Cambridge for medical school? I've got lived experience, I'll be rejected. Why should I apply for that job? I've got lived experience, I'll be rejected. Some of us can become indifferent or nonchalant, we don't care. And there's a third group who become energized. They develop what you call a righteous indignation. They want to be agents of social change and contribute to a cultural revolution to normalize mental health conditions. So many people with a mental disorder often have to choose between concealment and disclosure. So Coming Out Proud, now known as The Honest, Open and Proud, is a program that offers support with making this difficult decision. And an RCT on COP published in VJ Psych revealed that it had immediate positive effects on disclosure and stigma stress-related variables. So this is the Honest, Open and Proud manual developed by Katrina Skior at the UCL Unit of Stigma Research, and she collaborated with Patrick Corrigan in Chicago. And this is actually specifically for mental health professionals. So, for example, if you're a mental health professional with a mental health condition, you might be asking yourself, is sharing right for me? And if it is right for me, it's a personal choice. Far be it from me to impose my approach on anyone. It's a personal choice. And if you feel that sharing is right for you, then other questions might be that you might ask yourself, for example, are how much do I share? What do I share? Who do I share to? So, for example, I'm very active on social media, and there is an online community. There's of mental health advocates, and I think it's been hugely beneficial, certainly for my mental health and psychological well-being, but also it's helping me to campaign against mental health related stigma on a global scale. I mean, there was a conference in Australia, I think a few weeks ago. This was the Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Psychiatrists conference, and somebody messaged me and they said, you know, they made reference to your activities and your advocacy, and I thought, you know, that was really very empowering for me. So Carl Jung used the term the wounded healer as an archetypal dynamic to describe a phenomenon that may take place in the relationship between analyst and analysand. And Jung discovered the wounded healer archetype in relation to himself. For Jung, it is our own hurt that gives us our measure of our power to heal. So one way, my interpretation, and the beauty of this is that it defies a single interpretation. But my interpretation is that the deeper your wound, the more empathic a healer you are. Of course, you don't have to have lived experience or living experience to be an empathic psychiatrist. But I'm just saying that it's not entirely disadvantageous or negative. So when I was a medical student back in 2006 at Manchester University, I woke up one morning to discover that my hometown in Lebanon was bombed and that hundreds of people were killed overnight. And yeah, my world turned upside down and my nightmare turned into reality. And I saw harrowing and horrific images of dead bodies strewn on the streets of Lebanon, much like what we were seeing in the Holy Land a few weeks ago in Gaza. And that was very triggering for me, unfortunately, and for many other people. And I feared that my family were among the dead. I couldn't get through to them. Unbeknown to me, they were evacuated by the British government, thankfully, thank God. But I reacted. I developed a severe episode of psychological distress. However, debilitating though the symptoms of psychological distress are, the stigma was far worse. And I'm not the only person to say that. Many other people report that the stigma can be worse than the symptoms of psychological distress. So I was made to feel, I was forced to interrupt my studies, and I was ostracized and and marginalized and dehumanized. And I was made to feel like I would never recover, that I would never amount to anything in life, that I was doomed to underachievement, which of course is a myth, because not only did I recover, I was fortunate to qualify, and with Dr. Zaman's support, I received the Royal College of Psychiatrists Foundation Doctor of the Year Award, and then I got the Core Psychiatric Training of the Year Award. The point I'm making is that recovery is a reality for the many and not for the few, and that we really need to instill hope into the hearts and minds of people, because we can succumb to despair, and the consequences of that can be tragic. So this is further evidence to prove that not only can you recover, but you can actually achieve excellence in what you do. So the Canadian Psychiatric Association, they issued this clarion call that conventional education on mental illness alone does not reduce stigmatizing attitudes and behaviors in medical students. So we have a story, but what do we do with that story? Well, you consult the experts. So one of the reasons why I moved to London was because of Professor Sir Graham Thornycroft, who arguably is a world authority on mental health stigma. And I'm actually working with his team at the moment, and Dr. Sarah Evans-Lacko. So Professor Thornycroft, he brought this paper to my attention by Stephanie Naak at the University of Calgary in Canada. So these are the key ingredients of anti-stigma program. There are 6 key ingredients. Now, any anti-stigma program has to be evidence-based and data-driven. We need to be evident. We need to be innovative, and we need to pioneer these innovative programs to challenge mental health-related stigma. But also, it has to be evidence-based and data-driven. And we pioneered the Moody Theory, which has been described as an innovative method of teaching that blends the power of the performing arts and storytelling with psychiatry. And the argument we continue to make is, how can you educate an audience if you can't engage them? And so we harness the power of the performing arts to entertain, educate audiences, and then engage them. And once engaged, we educate them with the facts. And the main aims are to debunk the many myths about people who have mental health conditions that abound, and to encourage help seeking and to reduce stigma. And it's delivered by an expert by personal and professional experience, and EPPE rather, sorry. So then what I did was I tapped into the Medical School Psychiatry Society. This, as you will see in a slide in a moment, that medical school psych socs are a great kind of resource for challenging mental health related stigma. And so I took 2 years out of my training, and I delivered this anti-stigma program nationwide to 25 out of the 33 medical school psychiatry societies. And this is the feedback that we were getting, really, really positive feedback. As you can see, this is from Sheffield Medical School. Sorry. This is from, so I have encountered resistance. I mean, the feedback that I've received has been overwhelmingly positive, but I have encountered some resistance, which has been painful for me, if I'm honest. Unfortunately, the people who have been most hostile towards me are the senior psychiatrists, both in the UK and the US as well. And to the extent that I feel like it almost deterred me from continuing. But then when you get feedback like this, it inspires me to continue. And as Rashid said, I delivered it to 75,000 people in over 18 countries worldwide. This is the footprint. As you can see, Colombia, Malaysia, New Zealand. This is the cross-cultural impact of the Moody Theory. This is in the University of Coimbra in Portugal. So this feedback, very positive, and it inspires me to continue with my advocacy. So this is a study conducted by Sarah Evans-Lacko and her team on harnessing the power of virtual contact, because this is the digital age, and we are now in the kind of COVID-19 world, and there's a new normal now. And I mean, evidently, I'm delivering this talk online. So we know that face-to-face contact is effective at reducing mental health stigma. But what about virtual contact? This is an example of virtual contact. So this study revealed that virtual contact, a video featuring an expert by experience, is also effective at reducing mental health related stigma. And the authors argue that since short, effective video interventions are relatively cheap, conveniently accessible, and easy to disseminate, so we can scale these. These are scalable. There's no, arguably, there's no limit to how many people can actually access this content. So they recommend it for future research and development. And so we created the Moody Theory film. We secured funding from the Institute of Inner Vision, and we collaborated with filmmakers at the University of the Arts in London, the London College of Communication. And we screened the Moody Theory film at the World Psychiatric Association World Congress in Berlin, and also in the Doctors' Health Conference in Sydney. It hasn't been released onto YouTube yet, because we're still kind of submitting it to other film festivals worldwide. But this has been digitized. And so we can now we can scale this intervention up and try to reach out to as many people as possible. So professional stigma. So a survey conducted by the college revealed that 60% of the public believed that psychiatrists know what you are thinking. And 50% did not realize a psychiatrist had a medical degree. And wait for it, 50% of the public would feel uncomfortable sitting next to a psychiatrist at a party. So this is the professional stigma. So there's huge amount of stigma attached to mental health disorders, mental health conditions, but also to the psychiatric profession. So this is an article about the bashing of the psychiatric profession, and how the people they denigrate the psychiatric profession, not just the public, but it could be medical students, and it's referred to as bad mouthing, and the effect that this is having, up to a third of medical students may be put off psychiatry as a career by this bashing and bad mouthing and all these disparaging comments, like you're not a real doctor, for example, or mental illness is not a real illness. So this is really this is very damaging. So the Royal College of Psychiatrists launched this campaign, this True Psychiatry campaign, which has been hugely successful, and I was honored to contribute to that campaign. And there's been a paradigm shift now. We're actually approaching medical students with a mental health condition. We're saying that your lived experience is an asset that we embrace. That not only has my lived experience made me a better doctor, it's actually made me a better human being. And so we're actually targeting medical students with a mental health condition, with lived experience of a mental health condition. And this is a paradigm shift. This is very progressive from the college. And it's been, as I said, the campaign was a huge success. If you look at the fill rate in 2017, it was 67%. Whereas if you look at the fill rate in 2020, it was almost 100%. So I think now actually psychiatry is oversubscribed. And this, as I said, was the unintended but positive consequence of the Wounded Healer. So you get kind of free text comments like this, for example, which is very, very encouraging. So what we did is I collaborated with Dr. Zaman, and we used wounded healers to increase interest in psychiatry as a career at sixth form level. So obviously before medical school, and we recruited 63 participants, sixth formers, and we administered this questionnaire on them. The first construct was psychiatry is interesting, and this was a single-arm pre-post comparison study, and you can see that there was a statistically significant improvement in that construct. And in construct 2, again, also, if you look at the p-value, I would talk positively about psychiatry to other people. So this is kind of challenging the people who would badmouth or denigrate psychiatry. And also, I think this is really impressive as well, a p-value of less than 0.0001. I would consider psychiatry as a career. So the assembly on mental health was delivered by a wounded healer to sixth form students at an inner city school in London. So this was a study, a randomized study conducted by Andreas Martin at Yale School of Medicine. And the intervention was comprised of 2 experts by personal and professional experience. And the outcome measures they used were ATP, attitudes towards psychiatry, and attitudes towards mental illness. And as you can see, the participants in the active group had more favorable attitudes in ATP and AMI as compared with the control group. And 91% of the participants who were medical students report or agree that knowing a physician further along in their careers who struggled with the mental health issue, got treatment, and who are now doing well, would make them more likely to access care if they needed it. So this is Haritha, medical student at King's College London. She was the Royal College of Psychiatrists Medical Student of the Year, and she's the first name author of this editorial, which is not accurate because we have been tapping PsychSocs for many years now. Actually, this editorial cited 2 of our papers, but we'll just go with it. So PsychSocs are a student-led psychiatry societies, an untapped resource for recruitment and reducing stigma. So we collaborated with KCL PsychSoc, and you can see the speakers here. So that's Professor Jamie Hacker-Hughes, is a friend of mine. He was former president of the British Psychological Society, and he's been very honest and open about his experiences living with bipolar affective disorder. And this was a single-arm pre-post comparison study. It was a 100% response rate. We administered validated psychometric stigma scales on participants before and after exposure to the program. And so the higher the scores, the lower the stigma. And so this is for the knowledge domain, so the mental health knowledge schedules. And you can see there was a statistically significant improvement in knowledge. Also, this is for behavior, reported intended and behavior scale, and also for the community attitudes towards the mentally ill. So this is the first intervention study to challenge mental health related stigma comprised of experts by personal and professional experience. So this is before Andreas Martin conducted his randomized study, and I've now collaborated with the Yale School of Medicine, and please watch this space for some exciting developments. And the KCL PsychSoc event was associated with statistically significant improvements in respondent scores in all 3 stigma domains, and all 6 key ingredients identified by Stephanie Nack and her team at the University of Calgary for effective anti-stigma programs for healthcare professionals were all included in the KCL PsychSoc event. So we hypothesized that wounded healers can embrace their trauma to help harmonize the relations between providers and receivers, because, as I said, many receivers of psychiatric care report that they have been brutalized, and we cannot turn a deaf ear towards these people. We need to listen to them. We need to amplify their voices. And I think wounded healers can help harmonize relations between providers and receivers. I think this study illustrates the power of contact with the wounded healer, because we can leverage our personal expertise and our professional expertise. We need to show leadership in the space. We're not showing leadership. So that's considered a work in progress. And obviously, this study was fraught with limitations. More research in this area is urgently needed. And yeah, that's my presentation. Please connect with me on social media. If you have any questions that you'd like to send me, then by all means, contact me via email. But oh, yeah.
Thank you, Ahmed.